Hello, everyone. This is Adam Tubero, and today I'm joined by the CEO of Mindset Pharma, James Lanthier. I'm very excited to conduct this interview, and without further ado, let's get started. All right, everyone. So to get this interview started, we're going to kick the door down with this question. Once again, very excited to have James Lanthier here with me. All right, so there are a lot of buzzwords thrown around in regards to psychedelic drug development. Can you help the audience better understand the difference between a novel compound, an NCE, a next generation psychedelic? Or are these all basically the same thing?
I think, yeah, essentially they all should mean the same thing. And, really what they're referring to are drugs that are new at the molecular level. So I think a useful way to kind of think about this is in terms of coffee, right? Like the coffee analogy. So, groups that are working with old known drugs, like psilocybin, typically what they're doing is they're coming up with a new formulation of psilocybin. So psilocybin's the active ingredient. They're changing, some of the other some of the ratios of some of the other ingredients, but psilocybin's the active pharmaceutical ingredient. This is like changing the ratio in your coffee of the dairy or the creamer and the sweetener. What we're doing, what Mindset Pharma is doing, and what you're referring to with terms like NCEs or next generation drugs is we're changing the actual underlying active pharmaceutical ingredient. So that drug is chemically novel, never been invented before, and that's really, I think, what those terms are referring to.
Okay, thank you for the great response. So as far as what I'm understanding, so in regards to what Mindset Pharma is doing, so let's say, for example, to some a formulation of psilocybin that you guys would be working on. I know we're probably going to get into that later in the interview, but so can you just elaborate a little more? So like you would be changing what exactly?
Yeah, so we're inventing new drugs that haven't existed before. New active pharmaceutical ingredients, new compounds that are form the active ingredient. Really, it ultimately will form the active ingredient in a drug. Companies that are businesses that are working with with psilocybin. Psilocybin's been in the public domain for decades. It's been around in one form or another for thousands of years, and typically in the mushroom form. But then in the 20th century, it gets synthesized and isolated by researchers, and the structure of psilocybin gets published in academic literature. And so it's been around, and is that structure is really well understood. Chemists the world over can agree on what psilocybin actually is. What Mindset's doing, and other groups that are legitimately focused on NCEs, which stands for new chemical entities, or second generation drugs. Really, what we're doing is working with chemicals that haven't existed before, and get really identified and discovered by chemists. It's chemistry.
Oh, that's really interesting. So with the formulation that you guys are working on. So from what I understand, is please correct me if I'm mistaken. It's 4-OH-DIPT. Is that it? Isoprosin glutarate.
So that's a great question. That's not a drug that we're actively working on. We have some IP around some prodrugs of that drug that hadn't been discovered before, but our programs that we're actively working on are, broadly speaking, They are drugs that we take like inspiration from the scaffold, from the psilocybin scaffold, but we've made some significant changes to the scaffold that make it a new drug, and also more importantly, that where we're trying to create some differences between our drugs and psilocybin, some positive differences that are going to, allow our drugs to be better suited as therapeutics for, big patient groups. We're trying to do things like, make drugs that are going to be better tolerated and somewhat safer than psilocybin or 5-MeO-DMT, and hopefully have, in some cases, have a more convenient, or shorter duration. So I think this is the thing. One of the important things to keep in mind with drug discovery in psychedelic medicine is, we already know that, or have a pretty good sense that psilocybin especially, has a lot of really positive qualities and can have, a really positive effect in patients. So it's not enough to just, create a novel version of psilocybin. You actually really have to create something that has a benefit, above and beyond what psilocybin has, and that's what we're trying to do.
It's really interesting. So from some of the reading I was doing, it was so I might have had things confused here because I mentioned isoprotein glutarate, but so let's take it a step back. So you guys are working on a formulation that is going to be like a shorter acting psilocybin-like.
Yeah, well, not a formulation, because a formulation would mean that we were taking an old drug, adding some things to it to hopefully change some of its characteristics. What we're doing is we're creating an entirely new drug. We're starting with psilocybin as like our jumping off point. But then we're making some really careful, strategic, I'd say, substitutions and eliminations on that chemical scaffold, to try to create, drugs that will hopefully do as good or a better job than psilocybin, but will be in some ways, easier medicines, in terms of their duration or in terms of, how well tolerated they are by patients.
Oh, that's really interesting, because I know we already have, like, there are researched tryptamines out there that fit that mold. So, and they really excite me generally for therapeutic purposes. Like when the whole psychedelic sector started, or psychedelic biotech really started getting kicking, my perspective was always, psilocybin is great, but there's so much more there that we haven't seen, or that the masses are not aware of. And that can be created as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this class, the whole tryptamine universe, the whole psychedelic drug universe generally, like at the pharma level, this was kind of the undiscovered continent, right? Because for pharma, for decades, there was no rationale really for advancing psychedelic drugs. There was no real reason to imagine that the government was going to change the regulators were going to change their views of these drugs. And so for a long time, when pharma would screen drugs, and if it had 5-HT2A engagement, out it went. They were going to reject it from the screen. They weren't going to work on it anymore. But on the other hand, like, as you point out, there's been a long tradition of, frankly, underground, chemistry that has, and obviously the Shulgin, books are the best, example of that, where we know that there is a whole, a whole universe of other psychedelic drugs out there beyond the really, well-known ones like psilocybin, and LSD and DMT and so on. So that's one of the things that really excited our scientists about the space, is that there was some chemistry that had been done, but in their view, there probably was a lot more chemistry that could be done to, that could potentially identify some really, useful drug candidates.
Yeah, that's so exciting, and I can't wait to see just how things evolve over time. So to follow that up, so what is Mindset's process for discovering new drugs? And to build on that a little bit, what makes Mindset's drug discovery process unique? Is there any AI/machine learning involved?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the things that makes it's a pretty simple thing, but one of the unique advantages of Mindset is that as far as the psychedelic biotech go, Mindset really was one of the very first groups to start working on novel drugs with real, medicinal chemistry and behavioral pharmacology. So we have been running, an ongoing drug discovery and screening program since 2019 with really, some exceptionally talented early stage drug discovery scientists. So at this point, Mindset has a pipeline of hundreds and hundreds of different drug candidates that we've not only filed IP on, but screened and have some preliminary data on. And I think it's an iterative process, and the more that you do in this field, the more that you learn about structure activity relationships and the interaction between serotonin receptors and drug structures. So I think we've come a really long way. We started with tryptamines. We've moved really into even more novel classes of drugs well beyond tryptamines that we're really excited about. And I think probably the best indication of kind of the strength of the pipeline is the fact that we're the first and sort of still so far only group in the space to form a collaboration with big pharma on novel drugs.
That's absolutely. I'll definitely be mentioning Otsuka at some point. So, I mean, so is there anything you can say? Obviously, you don't have to be too specific regarding some of these uh, new chemical entities that you guys have discovered that I guess could be exciting for like next generation kind of psychedelics. You could talk very generally if you like.
I think all this is been in the public domain, so definitely can speak to some of this. Our we've got one drug candidate, MSP 1014, where we are in a dialogue with the UK regulator, the MHRA, the UK equivalent of the FDA. Which we sort of liken to a second generation psilocybin. It's a prodrug of psilocin that we think, based on its structure, has some real advantages in terms of could have some real advantages in terms of its tolerability. So it doesn't have a shorter duration than psilocybin, but at least preclinically in animal testing, we see some really strong signals of sort of safety improvement with MSP 1014 compared to psilocybin. So things like with psilocybin, we see a really steep decrease in body temperature at escalating doses, but with MSP 1014, we don't see those signs. Same thing with like locomotor activity, so the activity of the animals, where we see a reduction of it with psilocybin. And you never know exactly what the translation between signals in animal modeling will be and in humans until you actually do clinical trials. But our hypothesis is that this could be a drug that is better tolerated. And we think that when it comes to psychedelic medicine, if you're talking about taking these drugs out of a recreational context where it's a lot of younger people, and you're talking about treating patients who've had chronic mental illness, there's often more than these patient groups often have more than one physical ailment, especially with chronic mental illness. And so we think that safety is really an underappreciated concern. So those are some of the advantages we think of MSP 1014. with some of our families that were collaborated with Otsuka on, a lot of those are really focused around shortening the duration of effect, and that's really something that's comes up again and again when we talk to psychiatrists who've had firsthand experience in the field. Is that there really is legitimately an interest in finding a shorter duration drug that could convey the same benefits as psilocybin does, but in a shorter time frame, because as been discussed before, like it's a long time to have to spend in clinic, and it takes up a lot of resources. And so I think that's a really worthwhile goal that we're shooting for, and there's more work to do. But so far, based on what we've seen in terms of the data, it's looking like we have some drugs that really fit that profile. So.
Oh, that's incredibly exciting. Yeah, that was one of the major when I was just speculating on just how things would roll out. The length of a psilocybin trip is just it's a while. So at the end of the day, I think the shorter like poor drugs of psilocin or whatever the other compounds, they're just so important to making psychedelics work within the framework of these mental health clinics and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real diversity of viewpoints when it comes to psychedelic drugs, and I completely appreciate the diversity. But I think if your mindset and your goal is to try to, ensure that there's really broad and regulated access to psychedelic medicine, it is important to really try to address some of what could be the kind of pain points and stumbling blocks to getting these medicines adopted as widely as possible. And for sure, duration, I think, is one of those points.
Got you. Okay, so the next question: what is the anticipated ideal timeline for the leads of families 1 through 4 to report phase 2A and phase 2B?
Yeah, so MSP 1014, which is our lead from family 1, we're expecting to be able to go right into phase 2A later this year in the UK. And so, we'd hope to be able to share data from 2A and 2B later next year. Our leads from family 2 are, as we've said before, they're proceeding really well through IND enabling studies, and hoping to have those into a phase 1 at some point in 2024.
Oh, that was very exciting. Things to look forward to. So now, in regards to the family 4 compounds, what is the goal with the family 4 compounds, and how will Mindset improve the safety and efficacy of DMT and 5-MeO DMT? So NN-DMT and 5-MeO DMT.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Family 4 are our analogs of DMT and 5-MeO DMT. We think it's a really promising class of drugs, given the shortness of the duration and the intensity of the experience. We do see a much more elevated level of sort of safety concerns around those drugs in terms of serotonin syndrome. And I think those concerns are pretty well documented in the literature. It's not as safe those drugs are not as safe as psilocybin. And so, that's really the key factor that we're trying to address, with a candidate from those families is, a shortened duration compared to psilocybin, and an improved safety profile. And we've had some really promising results. Initially, our focus has been more on family 2. So family 4 is probably about 6 to 9 months behind family 2. But we're very encouraged by the results we've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I feel like in regards to when you're talking about the the goals for the next generation psychedelics, I feel like DMT and dimethyltryptamine and 5-MeO DMT are like right out the box, just made for like the duration 15 to let's say 20 minutes max. And I know like NN-DMT's safety profile is better than 5-MeOs, but
Yeah.
still they just could be better in general in regards. Was it
Yeah.
like cardiovascular effects?
Yeah, and I mean, cardiovascular effects generally, I think, is something that need more attention, needs to be paid to, especially with, again, compromised patient groups and repeat dosing and that kind of thing. But serotonin syndrome is really the key that we see, which is something you could find with SSRIs or antidepressants, and it can be a whole sort of basket of really unpleasant symptoms, and even in some cases can ultimately be fatal. So obviously, that's something that is worth trying to solve.
So when you're talking about serotonin syndrome in regards to dimethyltryptamine, are you referring to if, like, let's say somebody is on SSRIs and goes for a DMT session? Or are you saying serotonin syndrome just from doing a DMT session?
The latter. Yeah, it isn't. It's there have been documented cases of people having really negative experiences from serotonin syndrome who aren't on SSRIs.
Oh, that's really interesting. So to add to this, will Mindset pair the drugs with therapy? And just for example, GH Research, they're big on 5-MeO DMT. They're not going to be using psychotherapy in any of their trials, is what it looks like right now.
Yeah, really interesting. I think it's a great question. There's so much more research that needs to get done to answer all these questions about psychedelic medicine, or to try to give us more intelligence about these, whether therapy is necessary, how much therapy. Like there's a huge amount of so much more that we don't know than we know at this point about what the right model is for the use of these drugs. As far as Mindset goes, Mindset really is a very singularly focused drug discovery company. So when we set Mindset up, we did it with the view that there was really a big gap in psychedelic drug discovery, and that is what our scientific founders were really good at. And we felt like, given kind of the timing, there was an opportunity to create a really useful and ultimately valuable business that was really just focused on discovery. We felt like ultimately, like it or not, big pharma would play the most important role in getting these drugs to patients, because they're world class at that, and that ultimately they'd be interested in this category of drugs and getting involved, and they do regulatory engagement and understanding how different drugs can fit into the market better than anybody else. They'd be really important to building out all the infrastructure and attracting investment. And so we haven't, and it's really not our intention to get into kind of the clinical end of drug development. So our goal is really just to try to do the early upfront drug discovery, medicinal chemistry, figure out signs of differentiation in our drugs, and then partner them with groups who have that clinical expertise and infrastructure.
Got you. So we'll move on to the next question now. It's, what are the anticipated fundraising needs for Mindset? And can you give us a quick refresher on how the Otsuka partnership is structured and how it benefits Mindset?
Yeah, so the Otsuka collaboration with Mindset really positions Mindset in a very unique way. So we are collaborating with them on two of our families that we talked about, Family 2 and Family 4. And we announced this collaboration back in January of 2022. And under the terms of that, Otsuka made an upfront payment to Mindset, but then in addition, has been funding all of our development expenses on those families since January of last year, and all that funding is on a non-dilutive basis. The collaboration runs on those programs until the end of phase one, at which point in time Otsuka has the right to hopefully negotiate a new, larger, partnership or licensing agreement with Mindset on those families. So that has meant that Mindset has not needed to go back to the capital markets to raise new capital, as would be, pretty standard for an early stage development company. And in that sense, it's been a huge advantage for Mindset and a huge advantage for our shareholders. I'd say even better than the funding has been just the access to Otsuka's expertise. They are a top big pharma, but particularly in psychiatry, where they're really world experts at bringing psychiatric drugs to market. And just being able to really tap into that expertise has really validated our original strategy of really focusing on drug discovery and not hiring all these other experts to help us develop programs clinically. So it's been a huge advantage to us. And the result of all that is we have no plans to revisit the capital markets for additional fundraising anytime soon.
Oh, it's really nice to hear. Where do you think the psychedelic industry is at right now? And what are your opinions on the overall investor interest in the sector?
I think the sector, I think that the important thing is the science, and the science keeps moving ahead exactly like everybody was hoping it would. The clinical data that keeps coming in, with every passing month, it's clearer and clearer that these drugs have a role to play in the treatment of hard to treat mental illnesses. And that's the really important thing. I think there was probably a little bit of confusion early on in the investor community that might have gotten some of psychedelics confused with cannabis. Two totally different markets from an investment standpoint. But the thing is that the clinical results and the science are going to bring biotech institutions into the space, and that will ultimately, once serious biotech institutions get involved, that money will dwarf the initial kind of capital that went into the space. And it's really just a matter of time for that to happen, because you now have MDMA in late stage clinical trials. You now have psilocybin in late stage clinical trials. So I'm not worried at all. I think and the psychedelic biotech space, functions as part of the overall biotech market. And, the valuations in broader biotech land have been down for a while, but none of that can last forever, because it never does. So, my long-term view is hugely bullish on psychedelic medicine and in the investment opportunity that psychedelic medicine, represents, because it's pretty simple and you can explain it in, less than 30 seconds.
Yeah, and I feel like we also have this plethora of anecdotal research and just research in that general that's been done on psychedelics throughout all the years now.
Yeah, it's not just anecdotal. It's research. It's real research going back to the 40s and 50s. It's real, and the newer data is all real too. So, the drugs fill a need in the market, and a need with patients whose needs aren't being met today, and that means that there's real value in the drugs.
Yeah, what a tremendous opportunity!
Tremendous.
So I wanted to add on also is that, so in regards to, do you have any perspective on industry consolidation and M&A in the current climate right now?
Well, I think some of that is inevitable. There probably have been too many companies doing the similar things, or have similar stories. There isn't quite the same access to capital for the public companies like there was before. So yeah, it's like any growth industry, there will absolutely be consolidation.
Yeah, and I think like we're starting to kind of see some of it happen, but I feel like it's going to pick up as time passes for sure.
I agree with that. Yeah, for sure.
So what do you see as the biggest near-term catalyst to really drive this sector forward?
Well, this is not a novel opinion, but I think the next 12 months are going to be really exciting because we're going to get closer and closer and closer to the first psychedelic drug being approved by the FDA, which is MDMA, and I think that will take this from being something that is just exciting conceptually to being something that's concrete, and something we can actually relate to and touch and see in practice. And I think that's going to be a great development for the space as a whole.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that just in general, it seems that within the psychedelic investing community, it's almost like people are sleeping on the MDMA catalyst. It's just I'm surprised it's not being talked about more, especially as close as the closer we get to it.
Yeah, we've now had quite a number of years where people have been talking about psychedelic medicine as being something that in North America at least is like in the future. Well, that's going to change. It's going to be something that's like here, on the ground. And I think that will help make this more concrete and real for investors.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when do you see big pharma taking serious interest in this sector, as it seems that they may be waiting on the sidelines right now?
Well, I'm biased in my answer probably because of mindset, but obviously, Otsuka's collaboration with Mindset is very real, and there's a lot of work that goes on, and a lot has been invested into our programs. So I would say it's not a matter of when or if. I mean, big pharma is here in the space today. I think where there might be some confusion, and this goes to why we picked the strategy with Mindset that we did, is that my impression in talking with big pharma, other big pharma, is that a lot of their interest really is on novel drugs. It's less so on drugs that have been in the public domain, where the only level of intellectual property rights that they can get are around formulations. Obviously, it would be great if big pharma got involved with psilocybin, but I think it's not impossible. It's just less likely. And so I think there will be more big pharmas that get involved beyond Otsuka, is my guess. But for novel drugs are not as far along as psilocybin, MDMA, that kind of thing. And so I think it's less likely that you're going to see big pharma get involved with those drugs that aren't patentable, because what they're envisioning is that once psilocybin gets to FDA approval, you're now going to have a lot of generic drug manufacturers that are going to get involved, and so big pharma typically starts with drugs that are patentable at to use your term from the beginning, the NCE level, like new chemical entities, where they can own the underlying active pharmaceutical ingredient. There's a whole universe of generic drug manufacturers out there that compete based on kind of cost and manufacturing cost. That's not what big pharma does. Big pharma wants drugs where they can own the whole drug.
Oh, that makes sense from like a big pharma perspective. It definitely makes sense. So like to build on that, in your view, why do you think Otsuka decided to partner with Mindset versus other players in the space?
Well, I think Mindsets had two basic advantages. One is that really we have one of the strongest intellectual property positions in the space because of the dates of our patent filings, where the majority of a significant number of our kind of our drug portfolio comes from patents that we filed in early 2020. And obviously the date when whoever files a patent first has the most valuable position.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've really tried to follow kind of a classic drug screening program, and frankly not pretend to know sort of things that we don't know. So we've really been able to generate quite a lot of data on a very large estate of drugs. So I think it's really those are the reasons why I think Mindset was attractive to partner with.
So to build on that, and we touched on this briefly in the last question. So, do you anticipate Otsuka specifically having more interest in psychedelic new chemical entities, NCEs, or psychedelic inspired hallucinogenic NCEs? So I guess what we're getting at with this question is it possible that maybe Big Pharma is also just like, they want these new generation of compounds with, there might be less risk involved if there is no psychedelic experience, or less of a psychedelic experience to the experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I can't speak for Otsuka, but what I can say is that the programs that they're partnered with us on, those programs are psychedelic. Those drugs are psychedelic by nature. They're not non-hallucinogenic drugs. I think the rest of Big Pharma, generally speaking, fairly conservative, and I think there's probably a fair amount of interest in understanding whether it's possible to create a drug that has therapeutic benefits, but doesn't have the same hallucinogenic effect as psilocybin or one of the other psychedelic drugs. There's I'm definitely not saying anything earth-shattering when I say that I think there's a lot of interest in non-hallucinogenic drugs from the rest of Big Pharma, for sure.
So once again, to build on this question, and we touched on it in another question briefly, but and I know you can't speak for Otsuka specifically, but can you share any insight into the perspective on long-term commercial viability of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy administered in a clinic setting?
I'm not sure how much I can say that would add to what's already been said on that topic that would be like really useful and insightful. I think from all the discussions that I've had with different players, I think they're at least in the USA, a lot of this goes to insurance reimbursement, and based on what I've heard, for psilocybin assisted therapy, there's a lot of interest from insurers and a lot of interest from the federal government because of the comorbidity associated with treatment-resistant depression and post-traumatic stress. There's obviously a lot that needs to get worked out with the model, but and it's a different model than treating someone with an SSRI every day. But it seems to solve real problems that have been an issue for payers and obviously patients, but payers as well. So I'm pretty confident that there will be a viable economic model.
Oh, thank you for the great answer. All right, everyone. That was my interview with James Lanthier, CEO of Mindset Pharma. This was one of my favorite interviews I've done so far, and I'd like to give a special thanks to James. And feel free if you want to say something to address the audience, and say goodbye, anything.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Adam, thank you so much for the interview and for the thoughtful questions. They're really great questions, and I really enjoyed the discussion. And yeah, just want to thank everybody who took the time to watch any segment of this. I really enjoyed it, and also love talking about mindset and about the development of the medical psychedelic space. So please, we're easy people to find through Mindset. Don't hesitate to reach out anytime. Happy to chat with anybody who would like to learn more.
Awesome. Thank you so much.